Russia's state news agency TASS says two top commanders of fighters who defended the Azovstal steel plant in Ukraine's southeastern port of Mariupol have been transferred to Russia for investigation. Uncertainty has surrounded the fate of hundreds of fighters captured by Russian forces in May after a months-long siege of Mariupol. Moscow says at the time they were moved to breakaway Russian-based entities in eastern Ukraine. Citing an unnamed Russian law enforcement source, TASS says that Sviatoslav Palomar, a deputy commander of the Azov Battalion, and Sergei Volonytsky, the commander of the 36th Marine Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, were moved to Russia. They had been transferred by special forces officers from Donetsk, an eastern Ukrainian province that Moscow recognizes as a pro-Russian republic, to conduct investigative activities against them. Let's talk now to Professor David Awurawo, who is a professor and head of Department of History and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos, who joins us virtually. Good morning to you, Prof. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It looks like things are moving after it looked like there was a stalemate, but things now seem to be moving fairly fast, particularly on the diplomatic, if we look at it that way, front. Ukraine is likely to become a candidate for the European Union membership this week, but that does not mean it will become a member of the EU for weeks or months or possibly even years from now. But the whole thing was not about Ukraine joining the EU, was it? It was about Ukraine joining NATO. So why is this seemingly in the news? Because this was not the reason why all of this started in the first place.
Yes, Ukraine has leaned towards the West, in the past couple of years. And in leaning towards the West, there has been the desire to join the EU and also to join NATO. So the interest of Ukraine is in joining the two world bodies or the two regional bodies. One, NATO, the military; the other, which is a broader organization. I mean, with its objectives that are broader. EU has a set of criteria that countries must meet to be able to join. NATO has, a set of criteria as well that countries must fulfill, for them to join. When one looks at the structure of the EU and then the structure of Russia, the internal structure of Russia, it seems that it will be easier for Ukraine to be able to, join EU than NATO. For instance, one of the requirements of NATO membership is that a country will not have, a structure of separatist and, similar security complications. Ukraine has that. And it doesn't seem that it is something that will be resolved anytime soon. We know what is happening in Crimea and what is happening in Donbass, region where Russian-backed separatists are fighting. With that kind of structure, it will be difficult for Ukraine to be able to join NATO. It will take a long time for those issues to be sorted out for Ukraine to qualify to join NATO. But for the EU to be a lot easier because, the conditions are, a lot more flexible, so to speak. Even then, it is not something that took place in a few weeks or even a few months. It takes a long time for countries to be assessed and reassessed to be able to join this body. So it is work in progress, but it's not something that is going to take place in the shortest possible time. It's something that will take years. First, to be able to join EU, and then even more complicated to be able to join NATO. Which is why we have consistently said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a strategic blunder because Ukraine was never going to be able to join NATO anytime soon. And Russia had other avenues to be able to, pursue its objectives, within the region and within the international system. But tragically, Russia started this war, and we have seen the tragic consequences on Russia, on Ukraine, and indeed the entire international community.
I'm happy you mentioned that, which brings me to my next question, talking about peace talks. There were peace talks near the start of this conflict, and those weren't ultimately successful. And there were those who pointed out that, well, perhaps each side wanted to see how much ground they could gain so that when they come to the negotiating table, they have some leverage. Now, we're in week 16 now of this situation, and do you think either side has gained real leverage, so to speak, and that some of those who have backed Ukraine all along are now talking about Ukraine fatigue? That is, they're asking members of the Western Alliance to guard against that because this is going to be a long fight. We heard from the NATO Secretary General, we heard from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and we heard from a number of other European leaders who are warning that this is not about to end anytime soon, that so they should prepare themselves for the long haul in backing Ukraine in this crisis. Do you see now a balance for there to be peace talks, or is this likely to grind on as war?
Well, what I foresee is in line with what the EU and NATO, the European countries have, indicated. And that is that the Russia-Ukraine war will drag on for a long, long time. It will drag on for months. Let's hope it doesn't drag on for years. The reason is that there is now a stalemate. The support that the West has given to Ukraine has enabled Ukraine to hold on firmly, such that the quick victory that Russia envisioned has not taken place. Of course, Russia has its own limitations as well. The calculations it made were not correct in several respects, and that has impacted on their inability to quickly defeat Ukraine and fulfill their objectives in the war. But as the war dragged on, it will soon be 4 months in 3-4 days' time. As the war dragged on and Western support given to Ukraine, it has now enabled Ukraine to be able to hold on more firmly against Russia. That is why the war will likely drag on for many months, if not years, as the EU and European countries have indicated. But what we have, recommended all this while is, a firm and robust diplomatic engagement that will lead to, a quick resolution of the conflict. When the war started, it started as something like a zero-sum game. And when the casus belli of a war, the underlying issues are zero-sum, it is usually difficult to resolve, which means one's gain is the loss of the other. It's either Ukraine will join NATO and Russia will be disadvantaged, or Ukraine will not and Ukraine will be disadvantaged. But as things have unfolded, it is clear that some negotiation can take place to reassure Russia and also guarantee the security of Ukraine. That is what diplomatic efforts in the next couple of days and weeks should focus on. What will Russia concede and what will Ukraine concede, so that there will be reassurance on both sides and then build confidence to be able to lead to a resolution and an end to the conflict. It is very obvious now that the conflict has benefited no one. It hasn't benefited Russia, it hasn't benefited Ukraine, it hasn't benefited the international community. So much resources have been frittered away to prosecuting the war. And at the end of the day, like I said before, the objectives that Russia sought to achieve at the beginning could have been achieved without recourse to violence. So the war will drag on, but at the end of the day, we hope that diplomacy will gain momentum so that the violent conflict can come to an end.
I can't let you go without asking about the issue of the international community, which you have mentioned twice in your last two answers. It does look like outside of the EU, outside of NATO, outside of Ukraine and Russia, everybody else is acting as spectators. It's like we're sitting at ringside or in the stands at the stadium and watching all of this unfold, except for the fact that we're also being impacted. Stock markets are down, food prices are up, inflation is up in every country. Why are we victims of unintended consequences, yet we are able to play little role in resolving the crisis that has led to these consequences?
Incidentally, that is how the international system is structured. You have the superpowers, referred to also as the major powers. You also have the great, the great powers, who are the forefront of, resolving international conflict. If you take a look at the whole thing, you see that the United Nations itself that has about 200 members. The Security Council has only 5 permanent members, and then 15 in all, other non-permanent members joining. But those that call the shots are just the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Of course, those are also the major powers and the great powers. So that is how the international system is structured. It is structured that in such a way that it is those countries that are strong, that have the wherewithal to shape the world in their mode, that are also able to, contribute tremendously to how international conflicts are resolved. So it is in line with the structure of the international system. What has been most disappointing in all of this is the United Nations. Indeed, NATO, the EU, and individual European countries and the US on their own have been far more, effective in shaping the war one way or the other than the United Nations. It is so disappointing that the United Nations, which is the organ that promotes the international peace and security, has been in total somnolence. It is asleep in the war, in efforts to resolve the conflict. But it is in international conflicts, it is the major powers and the great powers that shape the course of things. And we are not surprised that even though we are all impacted negatively mostly, only a few countries are able to get involved to try to take actions and measures to resolve the conflict.
Indeed. Professor David Awurawa, thank you so much for your time and perspective this morning. It's been a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you very much.